Thanks very much for asking me to say a few words about Mike. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, and apologies for not being able to connect via Zoom. As I was thinking about what to say, I knew that there would be many other colleagues and luminaries who would share the academic and professional achievements of Mike. I assume the virology mafia will be present, and for those who aren't aware, it's the term I use to describe the country's preeminent virology elders like Mike, Bill, Dominic, Jeff and David. Apologies to those who think they should be part of that collective noun, but back in the day, these fabulous five were the go-to people as far as I was concerned. Assuming the virologists in the room will wax lyrical about Mike's virology and high containment achievements, I thought I'd take a different tack and share how Mike has influenced my career and how he has had an effect on national policy. I think I first met Mike at the inaugural meeting of the Public Health Laboratory Network in July 1997. Lynn Gilbert was our first chair, and we all gathered in the now demolished Fishburn building in Woden. I hasten to add, the demise of that building had nothing to do with the colony of microbiologists who had gathered there to form a network of laboratory directors which has developed into the bedrock of public health emergency responses, given that nothing can happen in public health without accurate, reliable diagnostics. While pathology may be the heart of medicine, diagnostic laboratory microbiology is the foundation of communicable diseases control. Since then, Mike has featured prominently in the development, evolution and maturation of PHLN. In nearly every important facet of PHLN's history, Mike has been there. Before proceeding though, from a personal perspective, I tend to vacillate between regret and comfort in rejecting an offer to be a senior registrar at Vidril in 1996. At the end of 1995, there were no consultant jobs in the greatest state in the Federation, so unfortunately I had to look south. I was offered senior registrar jobs with Jocketts and Vincent's in Sydney, and one in Vidril. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I ended up in the greatest territory in the Federation, and I missed the opportunity to learn proper virology from the master. When I'm asked what are the standout qualities I've valued in Mike as a colleague and friend, it comes down to his pragmatism and perfection. So is it possible to be perfect and pragmatic? Now when I say perfect, I mean doing things properly the first time. Measure twice, cut once. Properly planning a project and trusting your gut and people who know what they're doing, rather than the people who sit in ivory towers who have no idea apart from what academic accolades they may receive by riding on the back of others who do the hard work. This also goes to Mike's fundamental concern for the people he has responsibility for. I think if I gave away pathology, I'd be happy as a bench scientist working for Mike, assuming he didn't leave me in serology. Likewise, working for Mike as a pathologist would also be pretty cool, I reckon. I've watched Mike working with his Vidril colleagues and always appreciated how he could impart the imperative that had been issued by someone above and without in a way that is collegiate, practical and helpful. I know this is true for the trainees we've shared. I know Heather Wilson and Brian Chong had their training time polished and refined and perfected by working with Mike and everyone else at Vidril after being exposed to my version of bucket bacteriology in Canberra. A great example of Mike's perfectionism was the planning and development of the current Vidril in the Peter Doherty Institute. I've had the good fortune of visiting Mike relatively frequently, and Mike was gracious enough to share with me his thoughts and ideas while he was still in the Wrekin Street facility. When construction began, I marvelled when visiting at how the high containment suite was coming together and the details associated with its construction. It was fantastic to see the pride in Mike's face and hearing it in his voice. Now, given I was part of a group in Canberra funding various programs which relied on high containment capability, Mike's care and attention to detail always filled me with great confidence, which I could translate to my colleagues wearing suits in Canberra. While perfectionism is one thing, Mike will never let the perfect be the enemy of good. When in the midst of a swirling tempest of bureaucratic nonsense, rather than fall victim to the maelstrom, Mike will identify with practical and achievable path forward. It wouldn't always be easy, but it would preserve people and resources rather than look shiny to people in suits who like being in front of a camera. In all the time I've known Mike, I'm mindful of being called out on some things. Mike is good at letting me know about the dumb things the Australian government does. A few good examples come to mind. I won't comment on current circumstances because I want to keep my job, but one which will always stand out, and one which I use repeatedly as an example of what not to do, is what went down with PHLN as we were nearing the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Before Ablin became a thing in 2008, the PHLN members were largely responsible for the planning and preparation and response aspects of biological counter-terrorism from a laboratory perspective. There was a lot of work being done to ensure all states and territories had some capacity and capability. At the time, the Australian government took a view that it should fund and supply a nucleic acid amplification technology to all states and territories. It chose the Perkinelme light cycler, which at the time was a reasonable benchtop device which was okay for the task. The people in the department consulted with members of PHLN, and while many agreed with the process, mostly because none of us would say no to a gift from the government, which included reagents, consumables, and the offer of training, Mike pointed out that it would be a wasted effort for him. He pointed out the notion to standardise on one methodology to allow for platform sharing and backup during maintenance was flawed. He argued against standardisation and argued for a middle ground which would add to his capability and perhaps allow him to assist others rather than a cookie-cutter approach. Regardless, Vidral still received a light cycler and it never left the packing box. Later, when I joined the department and people had this light bulb moment and suggest we buy the same thing for everyone and bully them into accepting it and argue that standardisation was good economics, I was in a position to rebuke them and explain in the language of Mike Catton why it would be a dumb idea. Since then, we've lived through 2 pandemics, plus a few incidents of international concern like Ebola in West Africa and Zika virus, and each time Mike's sage advice has been useful, especially when it comes to workflow, stress and tension in systems, and risks, not only for his laboratory and the public, but also to the reputation of the department. In this regard, Mike is a tremendous sounding board. What I like about Mike is that his advice is sardonic, and we both know we have a safe space to discuss difficult things. Mike's advice is always sound. It's always secure. He's always mindful of a bigger picture, and at the same time, Mike wouldn't die in a ditch for something stupid. Like the great Harry Callahan would say, a man's got to know his limitations. So how should I end this? The greatest gifts Mike has in his command are his integrity and humility. He's a great bloke, and everyone knows it, yet he'd never suggest it himself. Is there any downside to Mike? The only thing I never understood is why he sets his email replies to plain text. I suppose it reflects the person he is. There's nothing showy or fancy. What you get are words of wisdom, words which make you feel reassured you're on the right track, and words to remember. Mike, I promise that all those text messages we've shared while enduring endless, mind-numbing and often pointless committee meetings, you know the ones I'm talking about, will never be shared with anyone else. And like I often say about CD&A meetings, I'd rather poke my eyes out with chopsticks, but having Mike on the other end of a smart device always made them more bearable. Finally, all the best, Mike, in the new position. I hope your influence remains profound and you enjoy more balance between work and home life. Catch you later.